Racist cop targets black woman at check-in. She's a government transportation official and gets him fired for misconduct. A queue stretches across the polished floor of Bradley Regional Airport, and tension clings to the air like static on a stormy night. Natalie Kingsley, a poised black woman in a tailored navy blue suit, can't shake off the unsettling prickles on the back of her neck. Across the checkpoint stands Officer Marcus Branning, his gaze hawkish and suspicious, honed in on her as if she's the sole threat in this bustling terminal. Something about the way he narrows his eyes conveys more than routine screening. Natalie senses trouble. She's seen this brand of prejudice before, but never this blatant or this personal. Bradley Regional Airport was typically a place of transition, busy travelers rushing in and out, families reuniting at arrivals, couples bidding emotional goodbyes at departures. On any other afternoon, the pace would be brisk, lines would move, and tensions would revolve around mundane concerns like missing luggage or delayed flights. But on this particular day, the tension swirling through the concourse had a darker dimension, a reminder that prejudice can strike anywhere, even amid the hum of everyday life. The building itself was immaculate, with slate-grey tiles polished to a glossy sheen. The Department of Transportation had recently funded an expansive renovation here, investing in new scanning machines for the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, checkpoints, and adding new waiting areas. Travelers milled about in a half-focused flurry, adjusting carry-on bags, checking phones for updates, or hustling through lines. Large LED screens showcased flight statuses in bright green for on-time, red for delayed. Everything exuded efficiency and modernity. Standing near the front of the security checkpoint was Natalie Kingsley, 34 years old, a rising star within the Federal Aviation Administration, an arm of the Point US Department of Transportation. She was known for her composure, her incisive intelligence, and her commitment to equality and efficiency in all matters of airport management. Her poise came from a thorough education and her unwavering determination to excel no matter the circumstances. Having graduated at the top of her class from Howard University, Natalie had swiftly risen through the ranks of governmental transportation roles. She was a consultant and policy expert, visiting airports nationwide to inspect facilities, identify flaws, and propose reforms. Her position allowed her direct oversight of operational standards in partnership with the TSA, yet none of those credentials were readily apparent from the outside. She was a black woman traveling alone, wearing a professional but understated navy blue pantsuit and sturdy low heels. Her thick curly hair, neatly pinned up, was an inescapable part of her identity. She carried a standard-issue black backpack with her laptop, a slim leather folder containing official documents, and a small rolling suitcase. The day's schedule was packed with airport reviews, contractor meetings, and a final consult with the local TSA leadership. However, from the moment Natalie stepped toward the security checkpoint, she felt an unsettling, watchful presence. Stationed right before the scanning machine, guiding the line with clipped directions, was Officer Marcus Branning. His stare held her in place for a heartbeat too long. She noticed his gaze traveling from her polished shoes up to her hair, pausing at her face in a disconcertingly intense way. She tried to ignore it. Stranger stares were not an unfamiliar experience, but something about this man's scrutiny felt uncommonly hostile. Despite her attempts to remain focused on her day's agenda, that uneasy feeling gnawed at her. What she didn't yet know was that Marcus Branning had a long history of aggression and misconduct allegations, though none had ever stuck. He had a reputation among some colleagues as a man on a power trip. A few even whispered that he singled out minorities for undue scrutiny. Airport security is always stressful, yes, but Marcus seemed to take personal delight in pushing certain people's buttons. Marcus Branning was a local cop assigned to airport duty as part of a specialized task force. The city's police department collaborated with the TSA in an effort to improve security measures. Marcus had served on the force for over 10 years. On paper, he was a seasoned officer with multiple commendations, but behind the scenes lay a different story. Only 6 months earlier, a complaint was filed by a 65-year-old black man who claimed Marcus used unnecessary force during a traffic stop. The man sustained minor injuries. Internal Affairs had opened a file, but the investigation went nowhere. The official statement concluded there was insufficient evidence to take action. Marcus was tall, his uniform stretching over broad shoulders. He prided himself on physical fitness and had a certain presence that could be described as intimidating if one crossed him. He had a strong jaw, short-cropped hair, and steely grey eyes. Superficially, he cut the figure of a classic American police officer. Some younger recruits looked up to him. They saw him as fearless and uncompromising. When it came to investigating suspicion or ensuring law and order, he took matters into his own hands, often with little regard for protocol. But there was more to Marcus than the uniform. Underneath the stoic facade lurked a seething resentment he rarely disguised. It seemed that whenever he encountered someone he deemed not to belong, particularly a person of color, Marcus had an uncanny ability to pinpoint the slightest reason to escalate a routine check. He couched his treatment in official language. "I'm just ensuring we maintain the highest level of security." Those who tried to raise alarms were often drowned out by official reports, citing lack of evidence. Marcus had grown bolder with each incident, brushed under the rug. This day was no different, except that the woman he'd locked onto was not just a random traveler. Natalie was a policy expert, an inspector of sorts. More importantly, she was someone who knew precisely how the system worked and how to use that system to stop abuses of power. But Marcus, of course, had no inkling of Natalie's position. He simply saw a black woman in line, someone that fed into his prejudices, and someone he could attempt to dominate to flex his authority. A brisk order cut through the bustle. "M.A.A.M. Step right over here." The tone was sharp, demanding immediate compliance. Marcus pointed at Natalie and beckoned her to the side with a dismissive flick of his gloved hand. Natalie felt a flash of anger bristle across her skin. She had placed her items in the bins, taking off her jacket and shoes as required. She was prepared to step through the metal detector. Why was she being singled out? But she reminded herself of the old adage, remain calm, remain professional. She had an entire day of airport evaluations ahead of her. She couldn't afford to escalate unnecessarily. Complying with the officer's order, Natalie lifted her chin and approached him. His posture was rigid, radiating hostility. She tried to remain neutral. "Yes, officer?" she asked with a measured voice, projecting an air of courtesy and respect. "We need to do an additional security check," Marcus said. He eyed her from head to toe. "Hands at your sides, please. I followed all the procedures at the checkpoint. May I ask why I'm being singled out?" "Because I said so." He moved in closer, letting the last word hang in the air. His response was so dismissive that a couple of nearby passengers turned to watch, sensing the tension. Natalie felt a flash of anger again, but reminded herself to breathe. She would not let him bait her. "That's fine," she said calmly. "Go ahead and do your security check. I have nothing to hide." Marcus performed the pat-down more aggressively than standard procedure required, pressing his palms against her arms, back, and legs in a manner that walked the line between uncomfortable and invasive. Natalie's jaw clenched at the humiliating nature of the search, but she forced herself to remain composed. The last thing she needed was to appear combative in front of the watchful public. When he finished, he handed back her ID, but not without one final glare. "You can go," he said curtly, as though he were the ultimate gatekeeper. Natalie nodded and stepped forward to retrieve her items. She collected her carry-on and personal belongings, carefully replacing her documents in the folder. She couldn't help but think that if he truly knew who she was, an official representative from the Federal Aviation Administration who conducted oversight on airport security protocol, he would not have dared to humiliate her like this in public. She wondered if she should reveal her identity right then, but decided it was premature. She had a job to do and would handle this at the appropriate time, through the proper channels. Although Marcus had dismissed her with a flippant wave, Natalie could feel his gaze boring into her back as she moved away. She proceeded through the terminal, reacquainting herself with the newly renovated sections of the airport. Her mind was split between the tasks at hand, conducting a compliance check, meeting with local officials, and her uneasy encounter with Marcus. The airport's expansions boasted new eateries, spacious seating arrangements, and high-tech scanning devices. Everywhere she looked, digital displays guided travelers, and well-placed signage improved the crowd's flow. On the surface, everything seemed to be a perfect model of modernization. Yet the presence of a single racist cop could cast a shadow over all these improvements. Natalie wasn't naive. She knew her job included reviewing how thoroughly officers like Marcus followed guidelines. After all, the very point of her role was to ensure the traveling public's safety without infringing on their dignity or rights. Her job also demanded she investigate allegations of misconduct when they arose. This situation now felt personal, but it was bigger than her personal feelings. Ensuring accountability and fairness was her professional responsibility. She walked down to the administrative wing, where she had scheduled a meeting with the TSA's local director, Helen Robertson. Helen was known for strict adherence to policy and had a solid reputation for ethical leadership. If anyone would take an incident seriously, it was likely her. But just as Natalie arrived at the administrative offices, she received a text from her colleague, Diane, a fellow FAA consultant who had accompanied her on the trip but was currently inspecting another part of the airport. Diane's text read, "Meeting with the runway inspection team running late. I'll see you at dinner." That meant Natalie would likely meet Helen alone if the local director was available. Inside the office, a receptionist greeted Natalie warmly. "Welcome, you must be Miss Kingsley from the FAA. Helen is expecting you." Within minutes, Natalie was seated in a cozy conference room with Helen Robertson. Helen was a middle-aged woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of quiet authority that made it clear she was not to be trifled with. Her career at the TSA had spanned 2 decades. She had once been a lead screener herself, working her way up through the ranks. Rumor had it that she had little tolerance for internal corruption or prejudice. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Kingsley," Helen said, extending her hand. "I hope everything has been going smoothly so far." Natalie forced a polite smile. "Likewise, Director Robertson. The renovations are impressive, and I appreciate the improvements in signage and passenger flow. But I also encountered something that concerns me." Helen's eyebrows rose in polite inquiry. "Go on." Natalie described the encounter with Officer Marcus Branning in measured detail, his curt order to step aside, the aggressive pat-down, and his dismissive attitude. She chose her words carefully, ensuring not to embellish. Helen listened intently, her features growing stern. "I've heard his name before," Helen said. "Officer Branning isn't under TSA jurisdiction, but he works closely with our security staff. Officially, he's with the local police department's airport task force." She paused. "And yes, there have been complaints. Mostly informal, but there was at least one official grievance lodged. I don't recall the details." Natalie nodded. "I understand that I'm here to evaluate how the TSA functions and to ensure compliance. But this sort of discriminatory behavior from any security personnel jeopardizes everything we're trying to accomplish. We can't allow travelers to be subjected to intimidation based on race." Helen's eyes hardened. I appreciate your telling me. I'll bring this to the next joint oversight meeting with the airport police liaison. We can't control every officer's personal biases, but we can expose them and advocate for disciplinary measures if there's a pattern. Could you file an official complaint with me? It helps with record keeping and might assist us in building a case if needed. Natalie paused. She had no doubt about the necessity of reporting Marcus. But this was bigger than just lodging a complaint. She also needed to approach it from her role at the FAA, ensuring that Bradley Regional Airport met the federal standards for appropriate security screening. I'll absolutely file a complaint, she said. I also want to see how the chain of command handles such issues. If there's a pattern, we need to work together with local law enforcement to fix it. Helen nodded, clearly in agreement. We must protect both the integrity of the security process and the rights of passengers. I'll send you the forms. Meanwhile, I'll see if I can gather any historical data on Officer Branning's previous complaints. They wrapped up the meeting with the understanding that Natalie would continue her official inspection duties throughout the airport. Helen excused herself to handle a separate security matter. Before leaving, the TSA director pressed her business card into Natalie's hand. If you need anything, if he harasses you again, or if you see any other concerning behavior, don't hesitate to call me. Leaving the office, Natalie allowed herself a moment of relief. She had found an ally in Helen Robertson, a powerful figure who seemed willing to investigate wrongdoing. However, a deeper sense of disquiet followed Natalie as she navigated the concourse. She couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus might not let the matter rest so easily. An hour slipped by as she inspected gate layouts, took notes on signage clarity, and made a few small-talk conversations with gate agents. Despite her outward composure, an electric tension thrummed inside her. She spotted Marcus twice, standing in different sections of the terminal, speaking with other officers. The second time, she was almost certain he was watching her. During her final pass of the day near the baggage claim area, she saw him again, leaning against a wall with his arms crossed, eyes scanning the crowd. The moment he saw her, his gaze hardened. She decided it was best not to engage. She had already filed a verbal complaint with Helen. The next steps were procedural, not personal confrontation. Natalie took out her phone, checking messages from her colleagues. Diane was still delayed. Another colleague, Jamal, was stuck in traffic on his way from a different inspection site. With no immediate meeting to rush to, she decided to head to the airport lounge. She needed to decompress and possibly jot down notes from her day's observations. Her mind kept going back to her run-in with Marcus. She could practically feel his oppressive stare even when she turned her back. The airport lounge was a quiet oasis, thanks to her status as a government official with certain travel privileges. Plush chairs, warm lighting, and gentle music created an atmosphere far removed from the hustle and bustle outside. Natalie settled into a corner seat with a cup of green tea and opened her laptop to begin organizing her notes. She intended to prepare a concise report for Helen that would detail the morning's events, focusing on the violation of standard pat-down procedures and the likely racial profiling. She typed swiftly, her mind crystal clear about each fact. As she neared the end of the summary, her phone buzzed. She half expected it to be a text from Diane or an update from Helen. Instead, the call came from an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, keeping her voice low. "What are you writing there?" a voice drawled. It took her half a second to recognize Marcus's voice. Her gut twisted. "How did you get my number?" she asked, stunned. Her voice rose slightly, attracting the attention of a few other lounge patrons. "I have my ways. Just be careful. People who make trouble around here don't tend to last." Natalie's pulse hammered in her ears. She made a quick decision. End this call. Arguing or demanding answers would serve no purpose over the phone. She hung up, feeling shaken yet resolved. This was beyond a standard case of tension. Officer Branning had crossed a serious line. Acquiring her private number and making a veiled threat constituted harassment. Her hands trembled slightly. She steadied herself, inhaling slowly. She saved her document and closed the laptop. Tonight, she would forward the report to Helen and contact her superiors at the FAA as well. If Marcus was capable of digging up her number just to intimidate her, who knew what else he might do? Despite her anxiety, she forced herself to calm down. She was not just any random target. She was an official government representative, equipped with the knowledge and connections to address precisely this kind of abuse. She refused to be cowed. Natalie decided it was imperative to inform her colleagues about this incident. She dialed Diane first. The call went to voicemail, so she left a measured message. "Diane, it's me." Something urgent happened with one of the local officers at Bradley Regional. "I'll fill you in later. Please call me as soon as you can." Next, she tried Jamal. He picked up immediately. Jamal was an FAA specialist assigned to ground operations oversight. They had worked together for several years, forging a solid friendship as well as a professional bond. "What's up, Natalie? Is everything all right?" he asked, sounding concerned right away. She explained the events, from the humiliating pat down to the menacing phone call. Jamal listened quietly, occasionally murmuring in alarm. "That's completely unacceptable," he said at last. "You're a federal official on duty. He can't intimidate you like that." "Exactly," she said, her voice shaking with residual anger. "But I'm worried he might escalate if he feels threatened by an investigation. We can't let fear stop us," Jamal said. "We have a protocol for a situation like this. You know, the department doesn't tolerate harassment of its staff. File your formal complaint immediately, copy it to your chain of command, and let them coordinate with local authorities. Even if the local police department tries to circle the wagons around him, we have federal leverage." "Right, I'll do it tonight." She glanced around the lounge, aware of the curious gazes of a few travelers who had overheard her raised tone. She lowered her voice. "I also need to talk to Helen Robertson again. She asked me to file an official complaint." "You think she'll back me up?" "Without a doubt," Jamal said. "Helen's got a track record of cleaning house when it comes to discriminatory behavior." She felt a wave of relief. "Thank you. I really needed to hear that. Hang in there," Jamal said warmly. "We're here for you. Keep me posted, okay?" Natalie ended the call, her resolve reinforced. She had allies, both inside and outside the airport. A well-documented complaint and a thorough investigation would be the best path forward. She vowed that Officer Marcus Branning would not be allowed to continue harassing people unchecked. That vow was no longer just part of her official duties, it was personal. After finishing her tea, Natalie packed up her things, resolved to leave the airport for the evening. She'd head to her hotel, file her complaint, and prepare for the next day's meetings. The events of the day were rattling her more than she cared to admit. A good night's rest would help her recharge. Stepping back into the concourse, she walked briskly toward the escalators leading to ground transportation. The overhead announcements chimed. People hustled by, some lugging heavy suitcases, others dragging reluctant kids. The swirl of humanity around her made Marcus's earlier threat feel almost surreal until she spotted him again, leaning against a pillar near a food kiosk. Her heart thumped harder. She wanted to avoid him altogether, but the escalators were just beyond the kiosk. She steeled herself and walked forward, head high. He was speaking to another officer, a younger man who seemed to be listening intently. As she passed, she heard Marcus mutter something inaudible, then she felt his eyes follow her. Clutching her carry-on handle, she reminded herself she was no victim. She refused to avert her gaze. Her eyes locked on Marcus's for a split second, catching the smug grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Her stride didn't falter. She continued walking, though her heart pounded. Moments later, Just as she stepped onto the escalator, a voice barked behind her. "Wait, ma'am, hold on." She turned. The younger officer was jogging up. For a moment, she feared the worst, that Marcus had concocted some excuse to detain her again. But the young officer held up a cell phone with a pink case in his hand. "You dropped this?" Natalie blinked. She checked her purse, realizing with relief that her phone was indeed still there. "That's not mine," she said, confusion crossing her face. She held up her phone in its plain black case. "See?" The young officer frowned. "Oh, sorry, someone said you dropped a phone." She realized with a cold clarity that it was a petty trick, likely orchestrated by Marcus to rattle her. The younger officer walked away, presumably to find the phone's real owner. Natalie turned away, her mind whirling. What was Marcus's endgame? Why was he so bent on intimidating her? Because she had the audacity to challenge him? Or because he suspected she was more than just a random passenger? If he found out she had gone to the TSA director, his aggression might intensify. But there was no backing down now. She had to stand her ground, both for herself and any other travelers he might target. That night, in the quiet of her hotel room, Natalie methodically typed up her official complaint. She recounted the sequence of events with meticulous detail, the baseless extra screening, the aggressive pat-down, the threatening phone call, and the subsequent intimidation. Facts, times, and locations were all documented. She also sent Helen Robertson a separate email with a summary referencing their meeting. The complaint was thorough but concise. In it she wrote, "I strongly believe that Officer Marcus Branning engaged in discriminatory conduct based on my race. His actions were not in line with standard security protocols. Furthermore, the phone call I received indicates a potential abuse of power and intimidation that should be thoroughly investigated. I request a formal inquiry into his behavior, along with any previous complaints that may establish a pattern." It felt strangely therapeutic to put the events into official language, removing the emotional charge and framing it as a clear breach of conduct. She concluded by requesting the TSA and local police department jointly review any available security camera footage and phone records to confirm the details. At the end, her signature read, "Natalie Kingsley, Senior Policy Advisor, FAA." That title alone carried weight. She pressed send and allowed herself a breath of relief, hoping it wouldn't be the start of a drawn-out battle, though she suspected it might be. Then she texted Jamal and Diane, letting them know she had filed the complaint. She received an immediate thumbs-up emoji from Jamal. Diane replied a few minutes later, "So sorry you're going through this, Nat. I'm here if you need anything." Natalie set her phone down, then closed her eyes, exhaustion weaving through her body. Sleep came quickly that night. Sunlight filtered through the crack in the hotel curtains the next morning. Natalie woke early, a knot of residual tension still in her shoulders. She reminded herself that she had done all she could. The complaint was filed and in the hands of the proper authorities. She quickly dressed in another professional ensemble, a black skirt suit, crisp white blouse, and low heels, then headed back to the airport by taxi. Her first stop was a scheduled walkthrough of the new baggage handling system. After that, she planned to meet Helen for an update on the complaint. By mid-morning, she was standing amid the roar of conveyor belts in a restricted area, accompanied by a TSA manager who explained how the new system tracked and sorted luggage more efficiently. As she listened, her phone buzzed. She saw a text from an unknown number. "Your complaint won't go anywhere. You're messing with the wrong people." She felt her blood run cold. The manager, oblivious to the text, continued his explanation about conveyor sensors. Natalie forced a neutral expression, but her stomach churned. Another intimidation tactic. She suspected Marcus, but she had no proof. She was increasingly wary of how brazen he was becoming. She wrapped up the baggage handling inspection quickly, then headed to Helen's office. The receptionist gave her a tight smile, ushering her into the conference room. Helen was already there, papers spread across the table. Her expression was grave. "Natalie, I'm glad you're here." "Please have a seat," Helen said. "I've received your complaint and started a preliminary review of the security footage. I also looked into Officer Branning's background. I think we have grounds for a broader inquiry." Natalie sank into the chair. "Thank you for taking this seriously." Helen nodded. "I spoke with the local police liaison this morning. They've opened an internal affairs investigation. Officially, they say they'll cooperate, but I'm not entirely convinced. There's a pattern here, several accusations over the past few years, mostly from people of color, but each time the investigation fizzled out." Natalie's heart sank. "So they might just try to stonewall us again." Helen's eyes narrowed. "Not this time. We have airport security footage that shows the pat-down wasn't properly conducted. We can confirm you didn't set off any alarms that would have necessitated that thorough of a search. That's enough to show a procedural violation. But more importantly, you're a federal official. Marcus picked the wrong person to intimidate." Natalie inhaled slowly. "He's been sending me threatening messages. I got one this morning." Helen leaned forward. "We can't let him continue." "Did you show the messages to the police or anyone else?" Natalie pulled out her phone, showing Helen the text. "He's using an unknown number. But I'm sure the police can subpoena phone records if they choose to. The question is whether they will." Helen's expression hardened with resolve. "We'll push them. I'm also going to share this with the TSA's Office of Inspection. They have the authority to investigate security personnel misconduct at airports. Even though he's not TSA, he's working in collaboration with us, which makes him subject to certain regulations." For the first time since this nightmare began, Natalie felt a tangible sense of hope. Helen was mobilizing official channels. Backing away now seemed impossible for Marcus. Yet a flicker of doubt lingered. She knew how deeply systemic issues could protect someone like Marcus. Would official channels truly deliver justice? The next 2 days passed in a haze of official meetings, hallway whispers, and simmering undercurrents of tension. Natalie conducted her standard inspections, always looking over her shoulder. Diane and Jamal stayed close, offering moral support whenever they crossed paths. Helen kept her in the loop about the investigation, but progress was slow. Marcus seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Natalie spotted him a few times, but he kept his distance, as if aware of the scrutiny now on him. She was in the middle of finalizing her notes on the airport's compliance with TSA guidelines when she received a disturbing call from an unknown number again. This time, she recorded it. "Don't think filing complaints will keep you safe," the voice warned. It was undeniably Marcus. "People like you are too stupid to know you're making enemies you can't handle." The vile racial slur that followed made her stomach lurch. She trembled with anger and revulsion, but she ended the call without responding. Adrenaline surged, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. She had him now if the recording was permissible evidence. That slur alone could bring the hammer down. She rushed to Helen's office, but Helen was out at a meeting. Instead, she found the TSA's Deputy Director, Martin Hall. Martin was a diligent administrator known for his strict adherence to regulations. He listened to the recording with pursed lips, nodding grimly. "This is serious. But we need the local police or the district attorney to consider pressing charges for harassment or hate crimes. Let me call them." Hours later, Helen and Martin sat with Natalie in the same conference room, a local police lieutenant present via video call. Natalie played the recording again. The lieutenant's face remained impassive. He simply said, "We'll investigate. Officer Branning's duty assignments are under review." Helen pressed. "We have multiple incidents, including a pattern of prior complaints. We expect swift action." "We hear you," the lieutenant said vaguely. "He'll be put on administrative leave pending the outcome." As the call ended, Natalie wondered if that was enough. Administrative leave was a start, but actual consequences? Too many times, investigations ended quietly, with a slap on the wrist. However, with the racist slur recorded, it might be a different ballgame. Word traveled fast around Bradley Regional Airport. Rumors spread about a confrontation between a visiting FAA official and Officer Marcus Branning. Some staff quietly cheered Natalie on. Others worried about the potential for negative publicity and the possibility of strife between the TSA and local police. A few individuals who had disliked Marcus from the start seemed almost giddy to see his downfall, but there were also those loyal to Marcus. He had a circle of fellow officers who believed he was simply doing his job. They muttered about outside meddling and unfair accusations. A few of them eyed Natalie with open hostility if she passed by. One afternoon, while walking from Gate B to Gate C with Jamal, Natalie caught sight of two officers whispering, pointing at her. She ignored it, but Jamal's face hardened. "Cowards!" he muttered under his breath. "Don't let them rattle you. We have the moral high ground here." Their negativity still stung. Natalie had never enjoyed being the center of controversy. She preferred working quietly behind the scenes, fixing problems with solutions rather than conflict. Yet here she was, the catalyst of a high-stakes standoff. Late that afternoon, she received an unexpected message summoning her to the local police precinct's internal affairs office. The text read, "Miss Kingsley, we'd like to take your statement regarding Officer Branning. 10 a.m. tomorrow at the precinct. Please confirm." She confirmed. The date was set. She'd have to stand face to face with the institution that had protected Marcus for years. She was determined to do her part. Whether or not they chose, real accountability was on them. The next morning, Natalie arrived at the precinct, a squat grey building that loomed at the end of a busy street. Jamal accompanied her for moral support, waiting in the lobby while she headed to the second floor. The Internal Affairs Department had a waiting area with plastic chairs, worn carpeting, and fluorescent lighting that washed everything in a dull glow. Soon, a petite woman in a sharp suit emerged. "Miss Kingsley, I'm Lieutenant Adelaide Carter. Right this way, please." Her voice was friendly but professional, lacking any warmth that might compromise her neutrality. Natalie followed her into an interview room. Lieutenant Carter sat behind a metal table, offering Natalie a chair. A second man in a plainclothes suit introduced himself as Detective Rodriguez. They explained the process. They would record the conversation, ask her to recount the incidents, and then go over any evidence she had. Natalie felt a swirl of apprehension. She breathed steadily, recalling that she had prepared for these kinds of procedures in her line of work. She provided a clear, chronological account, how Marcus singled her out at the checkpoint, the pat down, his phone calls, text messages, and that vile recorded statement. She handed over copies of her phone logs, screenshots of the texts, and the audio file of his hateful tirade. Detective Rodriguez listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Carter furiously typed notes. When the interview ended, Carter leaned forward, folding her hands atop the table. "Thank you, Miss Kingsley. That was very thorough. We have an active investigation into Officer Branning's conduct. If we need more information, we'll reach out." Natalie's instincts told her to push. "Lieutenant, I need to know if you plan to press charges, or at least hold him accountable. This is more than a minor infraction. This is harassment with a racial component." Detective Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Carter. Carter sighed. "We're treating this with the utmost seriousness. However, the district attorney will decide if charges are warranted based on evidence and probable cause. In the meantime, Officer Branning remains on administrative leave." Something in her tone suggested caution. Natalie recognized institutional reticence, but she had played her role. She had given them everything they needed to make a strong case if they chose to. Thank you for your time, Natalie said as she rose. She offered them a final, polite nod. Despite her frustration, she couldn't force them to act. She could only trust that the weight of evidence would be enough. After the internal affairs interview, the atmosphere around Bradley Regional Airport shifted once more. Marcus was nowhere in sight. Some staff, learning that he was on leave, quietly congratulated Natalie for speaking up, but the official resolution was still out of reach. Natalie's final day at Bradley approached. She had largely completed her compliance reviews and had only to finalize a report on the facility's readiness for upcoming expansions. She intended to return to Washington, D.C. soon to present her findings. She couldn't help but feel uneasy at the idea of leaving if Marcus hadn't faced real consequences. Yet her job here was nearly done. Late in the afternoon, Helen called her into her office. "Some news," Helen said, her expression unreadable. "Internal Affairs is recommending that Officer Branning be terminated for misconduct, including racial profiling and harassment." A bolt of relief shot through Natalie. Terminated, that's good news. But is it final? Helen lifted a hand in caution. That's just their recommendation. The police chief and the legal team have to agree. But it's unlikely they'll override it now that we have so much evidence. Plus, with you being a government official, this is drawing scrutiny from the Department of Transportation. No one wants a federal scandal. Natalie exhaled in relief. She had been bracing for disappointment. Maybe, for once, the system would work as intended. "Thank you for letting me know." Helen nodded. "Don't thank me yet. Things can still happen. I've seen last-minute deals cut before, but we're on the right track. Also, I want you to know the TSA is revising our Memorandum of Understanding with the local police, strengthening oversight. This should prevent officers like Marcus from slipping through the cracks." A sense of satisfaction warmed Natalie. That's wonderful. Regardless of how this ends for him, at least it won't be easy for someone else to replicate his behavior. Helen smiled. Exactly. That evening, Natalie was gathering her belongings in the nearly empty administrative hallway. Most personnel had left for the day. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call, unknown number. Her adrenaline spiked. She hesitated, then answered. "You think you've won, you little..." She cut him off. "Marcus, it's over. They're recommending you be fired." Silence crackled. Then a burst of vitriol poured forth. He hurled racial insults, vile threats, his voice trembling with rage. He ended with, "I'll make you regret this for the rest of your life." She ended the call and immediately dialed 911. She reported the threatening call, identifying herself, the location, and the suspect. The dispatcher was calm, guiding her to remain in a secure area until officers arrived. Minutes later, 2 uniformed local police officers arrived, neither of them from Marcus's circle. She played the recording. One officer shook his head in disbelief. "We'll file an emergency protective order request. This is a credible threat." Natalie nodded, clutching her phone tightly. Her heart pounded, but relief mingled with her fear. This new threat would add substantial weight to the existing investigation. If there was any chance Marcus might wriggle free before, he'd made that chance slim to none now. The next morning, official news broke. The city's police chief announced Officer Marcus Branning's immediate suspension without pay, pending the final decision on termination. They cited clear evidence of misconduct and harassment, referencing multiple credible complaints. Media outlets picked up the story, some highlighting the phone call recordings. A local reporter cornered Natalie on her way out of the terminal that day, but she politely declined to comment. She had done her job by filing the complaint and supplying evidence. The rest lay in the hands of the authorities. By noon, a press conference was held. Helen Robertson stood alongside local police representatives. They confirmed a zero-tolerance policy for racial discrimination. though they offered few details about the ongoing investigation. Marcus's attorney made a brief statement, accusing the city of bowing to federal pressure, maintaining that the officers' actions were consistent with standard procedure. But given the damning audio and repeated pattern of complaints, few people believed that defense. Natalie watched the coverage on a TV in the airport lounge, her emotions swirling. She felt relief, vindication, and exhaustion. She had never wanted to be the center of such a storm. She only wanted the airport to be a place of fairness and safety for all travelers. Finally, with her final evaluation completed and a flight back to DC in an hour, she retrieved her suitcase and headed to the gate. Diane and Jamal, who were heading to different destinations, walked with her part of the way. "You did it," Diane said softly. "You stood up to him, and it looks like justice is being served." Jamal clapped a hand on Natalie's shoulder. "I'm proud of you. That took real courage. Who knows how many people you saved from being targeted by that man." Natalie smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears of relief. "Thank you, both of you, for having my back. And thanks to Helen, too. She was pivotal in all this." They parted ways at the security checkpoint. This time, the TSA officer recognized Natalie's badge, and the screening was quick and courteous. No glaring stares, no undeserved scrutiny. She collected her items on the other side, exhaling a steady breath. In the weeks that followed, the internal affairs process moved swiftly under public scrutiny. Interviews were conducted with previous complainants. Testimonies piled up, painting a picture of Marcus Branning as a serial harasser whose bullying targeted minority passengers and drivers. A few of his law enforcement peers tried to defend him, but they faced a mountain of contradicting evidence. Eventually, the police department made their final announcement: Marcus was fired for gross misconduct. In their statement, they cited multiple infractions, culminating in the documented racial harassment of Natalie Kingsley, a federal official. Not only was he terminated, but the district attorney also filed criminal charges for harassment and making terrorist threats over the phone. The Department of Justice considered a civil rights investigation, though the details remained pending. Karma, it seemed, had arrived in full force. The officer who once seemed untouchable was suddenly unemployed and entangled in legal battles. The local press lambasted him as a symbol of systemic racism in law enforcement. Even some of his old supporters distanced themselves, unwilling to defend the indefensible. Meanwhile, Natalie's role in the matter won her respect among her colleagues. Though she never sought the spotlight, the news of how she'd handled the situation traveled within the FAA. She was commended for her professionalism, resilience, and determination to uphold the core values of justice and equal treatment. She returned to her routine of policy work with a renewed sense of purpose, gratified that she had made a real difference. Months passed. The scandal involving Marcus Branning slowly faded from the daily headlines, replaced by fresh controversies. But for those directly involved, the memory lingered. Bradley Regional Airport made a series of reforms, guided by recommendations from Natalie's official report. They strengthened their partnership with the TSA's Office of Inspection, implemented mandatory sensitivity and bias training for airport task force officers, and established a robust complaint review protocol. Every so often, Natalie would get an update. Marcus's criminal case was proceeding, depositions were happening, or a new piece of evidence emerged. She learned he had, at one point, considered a plea deal. Ultimately, the wheels of justice turned, and he eventually pled guilty to harassment charges. He avoided major jail time but faced probation, fines, and a permanent record. The civil rights aspect of the case still loomed, and it haunted him. Additionally, multiple lawsuits emerged from prior victims who now felt emboldened to speak up. For Natalie, life moved on. She continued traveling around the country, evaluating airports for the FAA. Wherever she went, the experience at Bradley Regional shaped her approach. She made it a point not only to check compliance with standard regulations, but also to discreetly gauge whether any staff members displayed the same kind of subtle intimidation she had encountered. She had a heightened awareness now, and she quietly shared her story with other officials, encouraging them to prioritize fairness and respect for all travelers. The ripple effects of her actions extended well beyond that single airport. Her superiors gave her a chance to craft new policy recommendations at the federal level, recommendations aimed at increasing transparency between local police forces and airport authorities, establishing minimum standards for accountability, and requiring more frequent diversity training. The system was far from perfect, but a small step toward improvement had been made. For Natalie, the confrontation with Marcus wasn't merely an incident she survived, it was a defining chapter that tested her principles. She had navigated intimidation, racial slurs, and institutional inertia. She had persevered, leaning on her professional network and unwavering commitment to justice. There were still moments at night when she'd recall the hateful threats, her heart beating rapidly. But rather than letting the memories become crippling, she channeled them into advocacy. She collaborated with diversity officers and inspectors across different agencies, helping them draft guidelines to protect not just travelers, but also employees who dared to speak up. She spoke at small-scale workshops about implicit bias, the importance of thorough oversight, and how to document and report abuses of power. In her personal life, the ordeal brought clarity. She valued her supportive friends and colleagues more deeply and took time to decompress from the emotional strains that accompanied her professional responsibilities. She even reconnected with her younger cousin, who was studying criminal justice, encouraging him to stand for the right values if he entered law enforcement. Ultimately, Natalie's experience illustrated both the fragility and strength of the system. Fragility in how a single officer could abuse power for years, shielded by complacency. Strength in how, when the right people unite, armed with evidence, principles, and a refusal to back down, justice can indeed prevail. Thank you for joining me on this gripping journey of one woman's stand against prejudice and abuse of power, one where fate delivered a swift, dramatic dose of karma. Natalie's courage, expertise, and unwavering resolve remind us that we each have a role to play in confronting injustice. No matter how formidable the system may appear, when armed with truth, accountability, and a network of allies, we can make a difference. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, or even if it left you eager to see more tales of justice served, I encourage you to take just a moment to show your support. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support not only helps these stories reach more people, but it also fuels the creation of more content that raises awareness about critical issues like racial equality, fair law enforcement, and the power of standing up for what's right. Together, let's keep pushing for justice, one story at a time.